A very warm welcome to all of you, in a way, pretty much around the world. We had 139 registrations, 121 associations from around the world, and I expect more associations to come on while we are in the process of the sessions. But it's great to see really registrations and people coming on from North America. I don't know why in the hell they get up at 4 o'clock in the morning to do this, but it's always great to have you. It goes to Asia, to Singapore. We have people from the Nordics, South Africa, Kenya. So I think what we try to do is of interest. And thank you very much for all your time and your interest to learn and share with each other, which is really what we tried to do when we originally started the idea of bringing people back together again when we can in terms of a virtual event. That obviously hasn't happened. I think we will continue to do these virtual events for quite a while. It seems at least so. And for that reason, we thought, okay, we already have the speakers. We have a program that seems to be of interest to people. So we just bring BEAF to BEAF virtual. And most of you will be on today and on Monday. Today, all day, some of you will come back on Monday throughout the day. Some people will join us in the second session. And I think it is also your BEAF, because what we try to do is really to make this engaging as possible, as much as you can do that in a virtual world. We also try to build some emotion at the end. I guess the question is always, what is it that people remember and what are their takeaways, but also how did people emotionally connect to the event? And for that reason, I'm glad to say that we have some live music entertainment at the very end at 12:15 to 12:30, when we have someone coming in to do a bit of live entertainment. And I very much hope so that you will be able to stay until then, because I think that could swing us very nicely into the weekend. And of course, with starting and kicking off BEAF today, I say happy Friday to each and every one of you, and we almost get started. I think when we looked at the first session and what to do, we thought, okay, what and who aligns with the broader mission of Association World. And the broader mission of Association World is to look at the more holistic approach of associations. And we thought then this could be very well the case with Colm, who kicks off the first session. But before we do that, we also have a bit of a partnership engagement, and would give it back to Miguel. Yes, thank you very much for that. And I mean, when we see this, I really have to and want to thank our BEAF partners who committed with us when we decided to bring this online. I mean, to engage in a physical event when we decided at the time and had planned to do so is one thing, but the other one is, of course, then also for partners to keep committing to that. And what we try to do is a lot about co-creation. And I want to thank Visit Brussels, the Barcelona Convention Bureau, the Hague Convention Bureau, Visit Flanders, Korea, ID Loom, and last but surely not least, also the Boardroom Magazine. It's great to have you, Cecile and Remy, on this morning, and thank you all for your ongoing support and efforts in helping to make this work. So, having said that, I would like to introduce Eduardo, who is from the Visit Brussels team, who is going to introduce the first session and the first speaker to kick off BEAF Virtual. So very welcome
Kai,
to you.
this is Miguel. I think you have a couple of announcements to make before that.
Yeah, happy
Is
to
that
do
right?
so.
Yes, that is
Actually,
right.
not minor detail. There are a few announcements indeed. Thank you, Miguel, for bringing that up now. We have two exciting announcements for Association World, engaging in a new platform, association community building platform, and we're happy to announce a new all year round partnership, global partnership with a platform called Bond. Bond will bring all together the communication and virtual event efforts that we are doing. We're excited about this. We are launching this now in early February. And I would also like to mention that Remy and Cecile from the Boardroom Magazine are also collaborating with Boardroom, and happy to look at some of those upcoming new initiatives that we will be doing together. But Bond is a very new platform to us. We were looking for a platform that is really engaging throughout the year, that engages the community throughout the year. So this is what it is. And thank you very much, Mark Mackey, for making this work. The second announcement is that we created now a brand called XIEF. And XIEF combines three of those events. As you might remember, we also launched last year a GF, the Geneva International Association Forum, which will be held this year on the 16th and 17th of December. BEAF turns into BEAF or BEAF, launched at the end of November, and in spring 2022, we are launching the event called NIEF, the Nordic International Forum. So just to mention that and inform you about this, and you will see more information about both of those announcements and activities coming up very shortly. So thank you, Miguel, for that, indeed. Eduardo, I think, is ready to introduce the first session. Very welcome, Eduardo.
Thank you very much, Kai. Hi, everybody. It's great to see you all early morning in what we can consider as a little bit of a virtual Brussels. Welcome to all of you from me and my colleagues at Visit Brussels. I'm very glad to introduce Colm, Clarke, who is a partner at Exempla, which is an association consulting firm, Brussels-based. He has 20 years of experience in management services, business events, and association management, and he's also facilitating strategy development for volunteer leadership groups. Colm will kick off BEAF today with a session that looks at the holistic development approach of associations. The theme is 2021 as a catalyst of sustainable strategy development. We should know that Colm is a regular speaker within the Brussels and International Associations market space. Driving change whilst building consensus is central to his work, which usually involves developing visions into organizational structures, educational content, and communications. Welcome, Colm. Thank you for being here this morning, sharing your professional expertise, and the floor is yours.
Thanks, Eduardo, and good morning, everyone. It's my objective this morning to kick off the event in a positive way. And I want to do that, first of all, by looking back at 2020, because I think there are a number of important and positive lessons we can take from 2020. And in the second part, I want to look at some specific reasons why we can be optimistic about 2021 and beyond. Now, there's a whole lot of reasons why many of us will never want to revisit 2020, and of course, you know, this is partly on the personal side. A lot of people had very difficult and challenging and sometimes traumatic, unfortunately, years in 2020. But of course, I'm speaking about the year now in a purely professional capacity as an association professional, and I want to make sure we understand it in that context. Now, you know, 2020 was chaotic and stressful. I think a lot of that, when I look at our own experience last year, was because we spent a lot of our time actually dismantling the plans we had so carefully made for the year. So it was very emotionally draining, because a huge amount of work actually went into breaking the stuff that we had built. As everyone knows, it takes a lot longer, it seemed, to cancel meetings than it did to actually finish them off and run them as they should have taken place. And, you know, while saying that, you know, it's easy for us to just think that 2020 was a year of purely disruption. But I think that shouldn't distract us from realizing that much of what actually occurred, or much of what our actions were, our reactions to the crisis were, they were not brand new things. A lot of what happened was actually more a sudden acceleration of changes that we knew were coming. So the underlying trends of increasing digitization, the concerns about the long-term sustainability of business travel or large international meetings. I mean, we've been talking about those things for years. All of a sudden, of course, we were faced with having to roll those things out or deal with them in a time frame of weeks and months rather than years. So as we look ahead to 2021, I do think this is going to continue to be a chaotic and stressful period, but it's going to be different because we are now in the phase of building something new. So that should be a lot more rewarding for us, a lot more motivating for us as professionals. And we just need to start 2021 with two key things. First of all, a long-term outlook, because what we're building now is not just a temporary fix for 2021. It should be a sustainable value proposition for the long term. And of course, the other thing we need is a positive mindset. So with that said, I want to take a look at some particular lessons that I think are very valuable from the last year. Now, when we talk about new business models or shifting our value propositions to digital value propositions, it's normal to be worried, to be uncertain, and it's wise not to be overconfident. I've used this slide in a few different articles and other settings, because I just think that the newspaper industry example is really a valuable one to us, because it shows what happens to a content-driven business whose content suddenly changes from being delivered in physical, tangible products to an online platform. Now, I don't think any association could support the kind of revenue loss that you see on that chart on the screen, and it's not something that we want to be going through in the long term. Now, the difference, of course, is that we are not the first organization, the first sector, first industry to go through this. You know, the big difference is that if you were a newspaper executive in 2001, 2002, you know, or if you were in the DVD rental business, or if you were a music label producing most of your revenue from CD sales, you know, you would have been getting warnings. You would have been getting predictions about what might happen when your value shifted to an online setting. But those were predictions. There was no case study. There was no basis for them to be sure what was going to happen. The advantage for us, of course, now the positive takeaway is we are forewarned. We have these case studies from the past, not from associations, but we have them from other sectors who went through this kind of change. So I think what's important to say here is that there won't be any excuse for association leaders or event leaders to ignore this history and say we never could have imagined there was going to be such a big impact. We have to learn from others. But like I said, we have the benefit of hindsight that they didn't have. So let's take that away as a first big positive point. Second thing I want to talk about is easy money. And obviously here we're focusing in on the regular annual events that a lot of associations could really rely on as their cash cow, which brought in a very reliable and stable and ongoing revenue stream. But you know, we all know that excellence comes from challenges. It comes from competition. It comes from sources. It comes from places of frustration. It doesn't come from comfort. Comfort and easy success, that's where complacency comes from. And it's natural if you think, for example, whether it's in business or in our personal lives or in the sports setting, how closely do we analyze and understand successes compared to how closely and how carefully we analyze failure. You know, and I think this is important both on an organizational level, but also on a personal level. A lot of people here maybe are working in organizations that are successful organizations, have always been have a track record of success or successful events, successful projects. So if you're in a leadership position or you're leading an organization or leading a team, it's really important, I think, to watch out for people in your organizations, in your teams, who maybe haven't faced failure before, because they may not really be ready to deal with that because they're used to being in a successful environment. So this period might be the first time that they really see their event struggling or not knowing where to get revenue from, not being able to hire, and so on. So it's a challenging time, and failure is something we need to get used to, at least in small portions. But again, if we're going to take positives away from this, what happens when we lose our cash cow, when we lose our easy revenue streams? We have now a license to change, to make big changes. And I know many organizations, many associations who've made changes in the matter of weeks and months that previously it would have taken them years to achieve. So, you know, we have this opportunity now to really think big, and that can be to think big, to reinvent, to create new value propositions, create new products and services. But it can also be an opportunity now to rationalize. A lot of organizations, a lot of associations have become perhaps bloated over the years. There are projects and sub-projects that are there, that are they really driving your mission forward? Are they really the best use of your resources? So now is an opportunity as well to think about what you can rationalize, and remove the things you don't really need or don't drive your mission forward, and make sure your focus of energy and resources are in the right places. Now, the third thing and final thing I want to come to as a lesson from last year is really around organizational culture. You know, everything I've been taught, everything I've been coached on when it comes to moving into a digital business, moving our business into a more digital mindset, it's all about moving fast. It's all about experimentation. It's all about knowing how to measure whether it's success or failure. Repeat the good things, stop the bad things, but basically whatever you're doing, you're going to do it fast. You're going to move fast. You're going to make quick decisions. You're going to be very nimble and very agile. So culturally, I think this is a huge test for a lot of associations. You know, associations are steeped in tradition, steeped in the principle of consensus decision making, and a lot of that makes associations special. You know, we have bylaws and statutes and committees and subcommittees and past president councils and all kinds of people and groups that should be involved or want to be involved, or what we want to make sure that everybody's happy, you know. But realistically, if you're thinking about moving your association forward into a more digital business mindset, you know, you're going to have agility in structure and decision making process, and that's really essential to get that moving if you've not already started that process. On the other hand, it's easy, especially as speaking to staff teams here and speaking as an advisor, it's very easy for us to point the finger at members and volunteer leadership groups, but also need to not forget about the association staff teams in the mix. I mean, a lot of people I know are drawn to association work or drawn to work in association management because it's not the same as working in a corporate environment. It's long-term vision. There's less focus on short-term revenue and profit. Maybe it's more stable, maybe a less pressurized environment. So, if you're leading a team, if you're leading an organization, make sure that the staff team is really understanding this strategic shift and why it's so valuable, because it may not come easy to people. It may not come naturally to them to think about this type of business transformation. Again, like I said, with all of this, for me, there's a very positive takeaway. And here, this is a chance, a really good opportunity for us to build more dynamic organizations, more dynamic associations. They can be more dynamic workplaces, more rewarding workplaces. And, again, if you're looking at your future talent pipeline, if you need to hire staff, or if you need to look at cultivating your next generation leadership, these more dynamic, more forward-thinking, more nimble, and digitally aware associations will be a much more attractive place to work and hopefully to volunteer for. So that's my quick look back at 2020. And now I want to hand back to Miguel, because we would like to get a quick insight from you in the audience and take a vote on a few key points. Yeah. No, interesting to see the mix. I guess not a big surprise to see the business models and the revenue generation at the top, because of course it's pretty essential to our functioning. Okay, so business models and revenue generation is the winner so far, and I think that leads me kind of neatly on to looking at how can we win at 2021. So I do want to point out here what I think are a few key reasons why we can be optimistic about the future of associations, and especially what those might mean for our business models. If we talk first about membership, we looked earlier at the collapse, in a way, if you want to call it, of the newspaper, at least the newspaper revenue model, and how that really struggled to go through the digital transition. But on the other hand, in the subsequent years, we now find ourselves in something of a golden age for subscription content, subscription services. So, the obvious examples, probably everyone has at least a couple of these, from the entertainment world, from Netflix, Amazon Prime, or Spotify, or Disney, who got in the mix last year. But there are also some very good examples, much more in a professional sphere or business intelligence sphere, like The Economist or the Financial Times. So, if we start thinking about a key part of our membership value proposition as a content subscription that is delivered online, we are, in a way, if you think about it, we are in a hot business area at the moment. So it may seem odd to talk about membership as a hot prospect, because we've been talking about the decline or the end of membership as we know it for a long time. But this is, again, an opportunity for us to reinvent membership. I mean, what worked before will not work now, but it's an opportunity to reinvent and add a lot of value if we can get our content subscription services running well. Now, the other thing, of course, is that membership is much more than just content. It's also a community, and what we see, and Kai, you were sharing some things about new initiatives earlier. The platforms are developing rapidly. There are more and more community platforms out there for us to choose from and to work with. So that development is going to continue. And at the same time, of course, our information overload society that we live in, that's not going away anytime soon. So if you think about your content or what you offer in terms of information services to members, that might be in the latest scientific developments. It could be something on a legislative update. It could be insights for a specific business sector. I mean, and those information, those insights that can be delivered either from content that you as the association prepare and push out or curate. It can also come from your community. It can also come from people engaging with other members and their peers. But whatever way you look at this, if you are able, whether it's in content or community, to give people relevant information, credible information, and of information and advice that's of reliable quality, you're going to give them back time. you're giving them the gift of time, and that is perhaps the most precious commodity that's around today. It's very easy for us to get more information. It's extremely difficult for us to get more time. So if you think about your membership value proposition as being a way to make your members' professional life more efficient and more effective, you're offering them a huge amount of value. Now, again, on business models, a lot of interest at the moment in sponsorship, another very hot topic, especially for everything that is online or online events. And you know, I want to be clear, there is a lot at stake here, and there's a lot at stake, especially when we talk about the return to exhibitions, especially large ones. But you know, this morning I want to be really, really clear that, you know, associations do not exist to run events. Associations are there to provide that content, that community, those connections that move a profession forward, that advance a sector, that help people to develop either their personal career or their companies. You know, associations need to find the best way forward. And I'm not saying here that events and exhibitions are not a part of that mix, but we don't have to be wedded to the idea that that's the only way to go. Now, there's a lot of resistance to this on both sides. As organizers, we know how those things work. We know how to put them on. So it's natural we want to do things that we are familiar with. It's also on the sponsor side, right? A lot of the people we engage with in the client's space who are sponsors, those people are people who grew up in knowing how to run a booth at a trade show. So they also don't know. This is another world for them. So it's natural that there's a lot of uncertainty and resistance to this change. But you know, going back to the theme of the session, I really want you to think about this not as some kind of temporary obstacle. There are going to be some quirks about 2021 because we're sort of returning to events in person, but maybe we're not. We don't know when. But don't think about this as something that you only have to do for 6 months or 12 months. Look at this as something that you can use on a long-term, as a new way to develop long-term partnerships. Again, if you go back 10 years, think how many marketing directors 10 years ago had a budget line for Facebook ads or for LinkedIn ads, or how many marketing teams had a budget for video production if they weren't doing TV ads. I mean, every single marketing team is now actively advertising on social media and actively producing videos throughout the year. So it's one of those changes that is surely here to stay. You know, now it does require rethinking. It needs a lot of work around thinking how, for example, sponsors can bring in innovation-driven content that adds value to your learning experience. We really need to think think e-commerce, not e-expo, right? We've all seen, I've been pretty blunt in some recent articles about, you know, the logo hall with fake booths and the same for people on the virtual booths. That's clearly not anything like the value that you get from an exhibition, but we need to think about online in a different way. We need to think about the benefits of having year-round engagement free from the constraints of time and space. And we need to think about how this will eventually then complement our in-person events when we get to go back on site, because the ability to extend the touch points with our sponsors and the ability for our sponsors to engage with our member communities throughout the year, that again is hugely valuable. We've put together at Exempla an ebook that really kind of condenses a lot of our thinking on this topic. So that's available for download off our website if you would like to explore that further. Now, the last point I want to come to today is to talk about hybrid. Another one of those topics that everyone is talking about, and a lot of the times we wonder, are we talking about the same thing? You know, if I think about hybrid, you know, in the good old days, you know, way back in 2019, hybrid traditionally always meant that the main event is taking place on site, and some or all of it is broadcast simultaneously to people who are watching in from somewhere else online. You know, that can be very complex, it can be very expensive. And the difference now in 2021 is, if you think about what we're talking about as a good on-site learning experience, a good in-person learning experience, if you think about what we are thinking is good in a good virtual or online experience, those things are now getting very, very far apart in a lot of ways. So I think if you look at our beautiful Pegasus here, you know, you really want to think of hybrid as, how do I get the best out of what I can do on site, and how do I get the best out of what I can do online? But I do think that a lot of cases, for a lot of organizations, that will not mean trying to do those two things simultaneously. That I think a lot of organizations will really benefit from thinking, what should I do online, and when should I do it, in what format, and what should I do when we get together on site? I mean, those first meetings, when people can travel and meet again in large numbers, there's going to be a lot of energy, there's going to be a real good buzz. You know, surely people are not going to want to sit down and sit in a room for an hour and not talk to anybody. So it's, for me, it's unimaginable that we can just go back to the way things were, either on site or online. You know, even again, mentioned exhibitions earlier, you know, exhibitions have an opportunity now as well to be much more experiential. They can do different things. They can think, really focusing on the things that are special to do when people are together in the room, rather than just thinking about this as another place to hand out your catalogs, because there's much better, faster and cheaper ways to do that online. So, you know, I'm not saying that this will not work, right, for some settings. There are going to be some meetings, some on a certain scale with certain formats, where it makes a lot of sense to do things simultaneously with people in rooms and people connecting, or maybe in a multi-hub format. So, you know, that's, I've got our friend, the platypus here. You know, he is very highly adapted to a very specific set of circumstances, but they're not very widespread. So when I think about hybrid in the future, I think it's got a place for simultaneous meetings, for multi-hub meetings, but I think that's going to become specialized for certain purposes. I don't see for associations that is going to be the #1 model, or that we need to constrain ourselves to think in that way. What I think we need to do more and more is we need to think about that integrated value proposition across the whole year. And I think this is going to lead to us seeing more and more blurred boundaries between what is education and what is events. Because again, associations need to think about, what do I need to convey, what do I need to educate on, what do I need to share, and then choose the formats, choose the timings that really add to that message and make it happen. So you know, that's my final thoughts for this presentation part. I hope it's some good food for thought and ideas for you to take forward into the breakout discussions. If at a later point you have some questions for me or want to connect, you know, feel free to connect on LinkedIn or send me an email. And with that said, before we jump to the breakouts, we have one last poll, and I'll ask Miguel to take over from here. Thank you, everyone.
Always good to see people back after breakouts, because that's where you lose a lot of people.
We had a very international group from Switzerland, Germany, Australia, Johannesburg, and the Philippines. And a couple of things that came out for us was that it's about having that extra time to listen to people from the bottom up, and then do something with that. But importantly, then it was also about, how can we actually figure out the skills and mindsets that are required to be nimble, and bring that on board. There was, I think, a learning from last year to bring into this year was, instead of having that one big event a year, this idea of breaking them up into multiple events, and even that idea that Colm mentioned about the hybrid, where it might be a mixture of events but then also ongoing platforms for engagement, I think resonated with a number of us. And associations feeling like maybe they have a role in advocacy around sustainability issues, climate change, health. We've all been through a collective experience globally, which seems to have been very empowering for people in terms of looking at those issues. We've got much less time, much more time because we're traveling less, but maybe there's a risk that we're a bit zoomed out. And again, that's why that sort of mix of hybrid and, you know, using a platform, community platform type thing was really useful. And interestingly, that we talked about what had happened to membership, and there was a comment from one of our associations that their membership is growing because people are yearning for that information and that, you know, credible content that Colm talked about, which is obviously delivering a value proposition for what it is that they're pursuing. So team, I'm not sure if I missed anything, but if I did, feel free to add.
Thank you, Julia. That's an excellent overview. That was group 5, I believe. Or
Yes, and let me just say, Miguel, Julia, thank you so much for coming on from Australia. I know it's a bit of a time difference, but thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Welcome.
For you.
Thank you so much. It's lovely to be here, and thank you for running the event.
And Julia, do I get bonus points for having a platypus in my slide deck?
I did put in the chat that, you know, we have platypuses everywhere, so.
Perfect. We'd love to hear from a few more groups. I think we have time for a couple more groups. And what we ask is that you mention things that were different in your group or discussions that went in a different direction so that everybody can benefit from the discussions in your group.
Okay, I can go next if you want to. So we had a bit of a more coherent group geographically because we were mostly based in Brussels and Barcelona. And we had a mix between convention bureaus and associations. So that was quite interesting. So we started off talking of events, just like Julia said as well, where I think 2021 we'll all try and focus on slowly moving back to in-person conference, because we all agree that those are crucial for associations survival, I think. Then we went onto a more philosophical, open discussion on the opportunities that a crisis brings. So just like Kai, you said in your opening, and Colm as well said, so we do realize that 2020 was a very difficult year in so many ways. But from a association activity point of view, in my mind, and on what we discussed, a crisis always brings a lot of opportunities for change, and that's what we all agree on as well, that many ideas or many problems that were discussed before COVID hit now all of a sudden become possible because you don't have this natural pushback of complacency of people saying, well, we've always done it this way, why should we change? Well, now the status quo of before maybe doesn't work anymore, and now we've actually got this possibility of implementing changes and of implementing new ideas that were not seen as possible before. So that makes 2021 actually quite exciting. And with this also comes a bit of an identity crisis, right, where now with all these changes, all of these, where are we going to go, comes this question of what is actually our real value proposition. And that's actually a very difficult question to ask, especially for associations or convention bureaus that have existed for a very long time. When you ask members or board members or even staff members, so what exactly do we do? Well, it's actually really, really difficult to answer that. And again, in an environment of change is now the perfect opportunity to really drill down and to really identify and do this whole exercise of why do we exist? What do we really bring to our members that as other associations in our sphere don't do? So that was actually quite interesting. And then we can back to in-person events again. Even for this also is crucial because it underlines this community feeling, which you don't get online. So the on-site events really do underline this need of networking, of personal contacts, which are also important for mentoring between generations and of creating this longevity of what we do. So online, yes, but just as Colm said, in a complementary way and not necessarily at the same time. And that's something that I think we all will try and define into 2021. How do these two spaces work together?
Perfect. Thank you very much for that. Colm, I don't know if you have any comments at this point, but we have time maybe for one more breakout report out. I'd love to hear from a group that discussed something different or had some different conclusions or different areas that they focused on.
I can go with Miguel.
Perfect, Tadea. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. So in our group, we also had international organizations, smaller associations, smaller and bigger ones as well. We had Jeroen from MCI. So we had a nice bunch of people from different, providing different aspects. One of the things that I would like to mention is that has not yet been mentioned. Of course, we have touched upon the events, but you also mentioned that event is no longer to be the main point, but you're asking for other things that one of the things that I think was super important has not been yet addressed is that it was shared that getting constitutions to change, it can take up to 2 years. So even if associations wants to be agile, it's not that easy to adapt so fast because of all the constitutions. And one even mentioned that they have in the constitution that they need to meet in person. So that's the challenges that some of associations are facing, which it's in these times, I think it's quite challenging for everyone. Also, what was mentioned is that people do not like change. So it's also, we need to look into the psychology around it, and learn people how to embrace change. Of course, one of the things that we also discussed is going forward. It was already mentioned about communities and building them all year around. But there was also an idea of association going into the subscription model so that members could subscribe to the services they do need and not to the full package. Going back to the hybrid events that was already mentioned, there was also a question about people, if we need more people going hybrid and to build those communities around the year. And I'm just going to end up with a really nice sentence that was shared, is the technology is not solutions, but people are. So we really need to upscale the people, and the technology is there to support us. So that's in short from our group.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Tadea. That's a really good summary. Colm, I think we'd love to get some of your feedback on this, if this makes sense to you. And I think, Tadea, you had a question earlier on that I think I'd also like to address to Colm, which is really about some examples from associations that have already done this, if I'm not mistaken, right? Let me just go back to your question here. That was your question. I don't know if you want to verbalize that, but I'd love to get some feedback from Colm on that.
Sure. Thanks, Miguel, and thanks everyone. I think it's I'm really pleased to see two things. First of all, that there's an overwhelmingly positive mood in the air. I think people really see potential here to develop their organizations, and the other thing is that also the diversity of thought and ideas that's coming out of these conversations. When we look at examples of what people are doing, I think there's a big difference between those who were in a way primed for this. Now, it doesn't mean that they were ready for it, because something I think we have to be clear on is there are no case studies yet for the association world to rely upon, because nobody has been through a COVID type of disruption before. So there is nobody who can come around. If you are a company, you can talk about crisis management. If you've dealt with natural disasters, you can deal with, they've lots of companies and organizations have been through these things. Associations have never been through a COVID. So there is no best in class case study. But what I do see is there are a lot of organizations who were going in this direction already, who had invested in e-learning, who knew that content was kind of their gold mine that they needed to create very carefully. And those organizations, they've had to change their delivery mechanism, but a lot of the fundamentals of what they were doing have remained the same or were in place. So they've had, I think, a real head start. Other organizations that have been perhaps resistant to change or didn't want to do things online because it was easier or more convenient to kind of lock it all up in that one annual meeting, and that's where everything takes place and that's where we do it all. those organizations have a much harder time because they now need to build out not just the infrastructure, but also the skills, which was just mentioned. So I hope that gives some input there, Miguel.
One more, Colm. There was a really interesting point made here by Judith Gold, I think. Breaking up lots of smaller events sounds like labor burden for the events team. For us, this would be a challenge, also since we're competing with other events and other organizations. So that idea of breaking things up seems to be quite challenging for some of the associations. What would you say to that? And please, everyone, if you have any questions, we have a few more minutes. If you have questions, just add them in a chat and we'll make sure to try and cover those.
Yes, every change is challenging, and every switch to the model is challenging. What I would say is, because we're actually doing this right at the moment for one client project, is it changes dramatically the rhythm of how we go about things. So the resources we need them at different times. The timelines change, they stretch. But it's also an opportunity to perhaps even out resources across the year. So rather than thinking, oh, all the program planning is done in those 3 months, now it's going to be all year round. So it maybe needs some change in resources or change in how resources are planned. So I don't underestimate the work that goes into it, but it depends a lot on what those events look like, because we're not talking about doing 12 or 15 annual events throughout the year. We're now talking about doing a focus session on topic X there, or a niche conversation on this there, or we're doing a showcase for somebody there. We're building out one workshop. So it's not just about doing multiple events. It's in a way breaking down people. Like I said, if you look at that big mass of what used to be in an annual event, how do you break that down into pieces and offer those component parts when they're very timely in formats that work in smaller settings, whether in person or online? So it's a complete rethink of how you go about the process. So certainly the rethinking takes time and energy, but I think there are different ways of looking at it in terms of what the overall resource plan needs to be.
Colm, if I may, can I just ask maybe Mohammed, who is quite active in the chat? Mohammed, I know you mentioned in December that you are hiring people, whilst other organizations are more on the negative side in that regard. You are actually hiring people. I mean, what are some of your approaches or solutions in order to tackle the resource part?
Thank you, Kai. Thank you, and congratulations, by the way, for the event. Actually, it's also what I mentioned in the chat. We consider that we are not events organizers. We are an association that happen to organize events. So the reflection we are having now is about our business model, and is about how can we answer the expectations of our members, and try to open our approach and go beyond events. Yeah, events are only one way of answering these expectations. So the members, they want to develop their business, they want to learn, they want to share, they want to cultivate their ego, I would say. So how can we answer these expectations? And then if events is part of the answer, yes. And so we are redistributing our resources, and we are now engaged in an exercise of really changing our business model and relying less on events revenues. Events will stay there, but we would like to be much more closer to our members, much more people focused. And when I say members, not the companies, but those who are working on those companies, because sometimes they have different expectations, and to try to understand their expectations and develop more tailor-made products. And tailor-made products, of course, it will need that we have a different types of resources, different types of skills. Sorry, that's different skills. That's why we are reinforcing our team to have these skills. And if someone leaves the organization, then we try to replace that person with someone who could have different skills.
Isn't, I think it's maybe also the fine line between deciding what to keep in-house or build in-house, exactly, and what maybe you outsource or start outsourcing.
It's part of the reflection too. You're right. It's very important, because we need to keep in-house only those resources that will bring an added value really to the members and things which could be outsourced with low added value, then it's better to outsource them. I agree.
Thank you, Mohamed.
Thank you, Kai.
Yeah, there's a great point made by Michelle, which is exactly what you were saying there, Kai, about the outsourcing. And Catherine from Rotten & Partners also in the chat says the volume of work can be managed by streamlining and clustering some service modules and business activities. So a lot of restructuring, I think, is and finding out what can be outsourced and what cannot be outsourced. Kai, I'll hand over back to you to maybe wrap up this session and lead us into the coffee break.
Yes, keyword coffee break, not quite yet. I mean, first of all, Colm, thank you so much to you and your team. It's great you are part of this. I think this is the beginning of something good. Clearly, with your global perspective of engaging with international US-based organizations and running them in Europe and other parts of the world, I think you really bring in that different perspective, maybe that more global perspective, and that holistic approach, which is also what Association World is about. I encourage everyone to remain in contact with Colm. Colm, again, thank you so much for joining us this morning. And it's not easy these days to find the speakers, also the right speakers. We all know that we all organize and are in need of good speakers relevant for what we try to deliver. So thank you to you and to everyone.